Good afternoon. Chairman Peterson, Vice Chair Thomas, Ranking Member Humphrey, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present House Joint Resolution 3 to you today. The gravity and importance of this topic cannot be understated. I thank you in advance for the thoughtful consideration that you will give it. It is my opinion that to save and preserve our great union, we must go down this difficult path. I'm here again today to urge this body to join the growing number of states in this union to call a convention of states under Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution. I've come to this position reluctantly, with much research, deliberation, and prayer. This provision in Article 5 was placed into our Constitution in case of emergency, as a position of last legal resort. It is there in the case that the federal government would become too expansive, too intrusive, and too unaccountable to the states. Simply put, I argue to you all today that the federal government is too expansive, too intrusive, and too unaccountable to the states, and the time is at hand. I would bet at some point over the course of the last few presidential administrations that everyone in the room here would have thought the ideas coming out of D.C. were authoritarian. This is not about partisan differences. This is about state sovereignty. Think about how often we discuss bills in this House and come to a point where we find that we will lose federal funds unless we perform X, Y, or Z. Dependence on the federal funds cannot be an option. HJR 3 would join Ohio to an ongoing call for a convention of states to be called under Article 5 of the Constitution of the United States. Article 5 is an important constitutional tool that our founders gave us and created for states to hold our federal government accountable. The size and scope of the federal government has grown consistently throughout the history of this nation, with more and more responsibility being abdicated by Congress to federal agency rulemaking and executive orders. It has long been unsustainable, and we have waited long enough for Congress to fix itself. Our government was always meant to be bottom-up, not top-down. Our federal government was supposed to have very limited powers, yet has amassed more and more than our founders ever envisioned. For the reminder of you all and for the knowledge of anybody who's listening, Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution provides a method for the states to propose amendments to the Constitution. Article 5 lays out how to amend the U.S. Constitution. It provides two paths, one being through Congress, the other, if Congress fails to act, the states may choose to do so. For this to be initiated, 34 states, 2/3 of the states, must pass a resolution, such as the one before you today, on the same common subject matter. Once 34 states have done so, Congress must call a convention in which each state sends its own delegates to attend. After deliberation and debate, each state receives one vote on any proposed amendment to the Constitution, or at the convention to the Constitution. Proposed amendments germane to the call require a simple majority vote, 26 at the current number of states that we have of 50. The process is not over then. The final stopgap, the passed amendments must be ratified by 38, 3/4 of the states. Therein, this process is not easy and cannot be partisan. Simply put, to amend the U.S. Constitution, you need very broad support across this country. It is protected from partisan, divisive attempts to amend. Our call, HJR 3, calls an amending convention limited to proposing amendments that, one, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, a balanced budget amendment. Two, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government. And three, limit the terms of office for its officials and members of Congress of the United States. Those are the three subject areas that would be germane to the convention that we are calling. House Joint Resolution 3 is incredibly important to Ohio and the future of America. We've watched as federal government in D.C. have grown not only in size but in control and wealth in the D.C. area. Again, this is not a political partisan debate, but rather one of the only mechanisms to restore the balance of state rights. I'm just going to highlight one of the issues that we're talking about discussing. one of the issues that the states have no control over, and that's the federal budget. On the fiscal restraints issue, otherwise known as the balanced budget, as you all know, we have to abide by here in the state of Ohio. We have to pass a balanced budget. It's something we always go back home and we're proud of. Federal government has no means to do so. In just the last 4 years alone, we've added roughly $9 trillion to our national debt, just with surplus deficit budgets. In 2020, I'll step through the years. In 2020, the government spent $6.6 trillion, bringing in only $3.4 trillion. That's a $3.2 trillion deficit. In 2021, we spent $6.8 when we brought in $4. In 2022, we spent $6.5, we brought in $5 trillion. And in 2023, that just ended, we spent $6.1 trillion and brought in $4.4 trillion. In fact, over the last 50 years, if we zoom out and look at the last 50 years, our federal government has run a fiscal year deficit 45 times out of 50. The last time we had a budget surplus federally was 2001. I was a junior in high school, 23 years ago. I've attached a couple of the graphs there that just show you the outrageous increases, not only in our deficits, but in our national debt. We cannot continue at this pace. I gave testimony 2 years ago on this same bill. At that point, we were $28.8 trillion U.S. national debt. Today, we stand at $33.7. Within the next 5 years, the interest payment alone, not even factoring in the debt we owe, the interest on that debt will likely exceed over $1 trillion per year and be one of the largest federal expenditures, passing our defense spending. Simply put, this is not sustainable. To think that our fiat currency, the U.S. dollar, is invincible is a fool's errand, and if we do not change course to sound monetary policy, the consequences will be severe. The only time in recent history that Congress addressed spending issues was in the 90s, following a concerted effort by the states to call a convention for a balanced budget. In the 80s, it was led by then President Reagan, who received momentum and nearly 34 states initiated a call for a convention on a balanced budget before Congress acted. At that time, there was even a then senator from Delaware, named Joe Biden, who raised economic disaster alarms about the deficits and worked across the aisle to restore restraints to the federal government spending. Without the continued pressure, those years were few, and Congress quickly went back to spending unabated. We believe it's imperative to the ongoing success of this great nation for Ohio to join the list of 19 other states listed at the end of my testimony that have already passed a similar resolution to hold the federal government accountable. At my last sponsor testimony 2 years ago, we were at 15. Today, we stand at 19. 4 additional states have subsequently passed. They're Wisconsin, Nebraska, West Virginia, and South Carolina. So I've laid out the case for why, in essence, we need this. But the real question at hand for all of us to consider and for our nation to consider is, do you believe that our nation is on a path of peril or not? I believe the answer to that question is obvious for the reasons I listed and many more. So based on that fact, what do we do about it before it's too late? What is the solution? Some will come in and say that we need to elect better people to make the right changes. I would argue that time has proven that ineffective, and we cannot elect enough members to Congress or to the Oval Office to address these real concerns of the states, who are the owners of this Constitution. Some say that we are too divided as a nation to hold a convention and to pass anything that will get through. And we don't know what may come through from a convention, from a divided nation. The process itself forces overwhelming support for anything that is produced. Maybe nothing will come from a convention due to our current partisan divide. That is a possibility. But I do believe that we have men and women of our time that are capable of rising to the task at hand, to enact the change and garner the support necessary to right this great experiment in self-government. Do not deceive yourself that we are fine. Every generation must keep it. I'm going to conclude with the words from President Reagan in a letter to Lou Euler back in 1994 when the states were gathering support for the balanced budget amendment. He writes, "Lou, it is clear that we must rely on the states to force Congress to act. Fortunately, our nation's founders gave us the means to amend the Constitution through action of state legislatures, which you have been widely pursuing. Unless we act quickly, the people in the White House and those running Congress will bankrupt America. The good, honest, productive people of America are frightened and angry. They must get behind you in this effort. Our opportunity has never been greater." Those words were written nearly 30 years ago and nearly 29 trillion less in debt. And they couldn't be more true today. Reagan ended his letter as I'll end with you as well. "As I have said before, if not now, when? And if not us, who?" It's my hope that this committee will give this proposal the serious consideration it deserves. It's time the states force Congress once again to act. And if they won't, we must.